Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist. Our co-host, Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the state Republican Party and the county chair of the Suffolk County Party, regrettably is out today under the weather. We look forward to
I think he's just afraid to talk about Juan Soto going to the Mets.
Well,
let's be honest.
You Yankee-Met rivalry types. I don't know why this is so important. I haven't.
If you have,
I haven't cared about baseball and the Mets since Gary Carter.
Well, as Mark Twain said, if you have to ask, you'll never get to know.
Thank you. And the rumors of his death were greatly exaggerated. I remember that. Okay, so Eric, let's begin. I think one of the most important events of the 21st century is the fall of Saddam of Syria.
Assad.
Yeah. Of Syria. I think it's a major historical event. It gives an opportunity to reshape the Middle East that has implications for Europe and the United States, worldwide implications. So the questions I have for you is, why is this so important? There's the issue of Russia and Iran, Erdogan and Turkey, the resurrection, potentially, of Islamic terrorists in the Middle East using another base, this time Syria. Israel may have a threat as these guys move closer to their territory. Israel has already launched preemptive strikes against their chemical weapons, military assets, military bases, naval ships, helicopters, planes, which I think, by the way, is absolutely essential because I trust these people not a whit. They're very, very dangerous to Islamists. Notwithstanding their rhetoric, they've already started to move, as we speak, with executions of their enemies, summary executions, and already indicated that all female judges previously holding the bench in Syria will no longer have jurisdiction as judges. All the cases being moved over to males. It's the beginning of their pronouncements that they can be Sharia law. At the same time, they're saying, and I don't know how you rationalize this, that they can have tolerance for all groups and all religions, including Christians, that the Kurds have nothing to fear, the Druze have nothing to fear, the Christians have nothing to fear, and yet they're announcing that they want to do Sharia law. Seems to me that's a little bit of an oxymoron, Eric, but I leave it to your wisdom and insight to tell me what's going to happen in Syria and what should Israel and the United States be doing.
Well, it really is a dramatic turn of events that happened quite rapidly. Let's first address Joe Biden's statement to the public where he took full credit for what's happening in Syria. Joe Biden, it's important to note that this all happened in spite of what Joe Biden tried to achieve. The only reason this has happened is because of Israel's success in decimating Hamas and neutering Hezbollah and taking out the Iranian missile defense systems in their attack. If it would have been left to Joe Biden, Israel would not have been allowed to enter Gaza, and Hamas would have won. Israel would not have retaliated against Hezbollah, and Hezbollah would have been strengthened. And Israel would not have attacked Iran, and Iran would be that much closer to a nuclear weapon and their hegemonic goal in the Middle East. But because Israel was successful in attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which was Iran, it's not just Iran's proxy. Hezbollah is created by Iran. Hezbollah is Iran.
It was their front line of defense, wasn't it?
And they were the primary force behind supporting Assad. So they all had to abandon Assad to go defend Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Israelis were attacking them. Their other support for Assad was from the Russians, and the Russians were pulling out because they had to go. They had to supplement their troops in Ukraine because over 700,000 Russians have died in Ukraine. It's just the number is just unfathomable. Anyway, so this all happened, had little or nothing to do with what Joe Biden did in the Middle East. It had to do with the Israelis nodding at Joe Biden and then ignoring him and doing what they had to do in the Middle East. So this now presents lots of opportunities, and it also presents lots of dangers. What are the opportunities? The first opportunity is now that Assad is gone and Syria is completely fractured. I mean, and Syria has been fractured basically since 2011. Let's remember, Syria is a figment or is a creation of the British and the French from 1916 in the Sykes-Picot
beginning
Agreement.
of the 20th century.
Beginning of the 20th century, when the Ottoman Empire fell, the Ottomans had ruled the Middle East for 500 years. And when the Ottoman Empire fell and the British and French came to fill the void, they negotiated a deal between themselves called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and they literally just carved up the Middle East, creating artificial borders, putting peoples together that had never lived together before, no shared history, no shared vision for the future. And naturally, these countries had a lot of trouble forming. Look at Iraq. You had the Kurds, you have the Sunnis, you have the Shiites, and in Syria you have the Druze, you have the Alawites, you have the Shiites, you have the Sunnis, you have the Kurds, you have Arabs. It's completely there's no shared vision there. There's no nation. There's just the artificial border. So I don't think anybody anticipated when Hayat al-Sham, which is an al-Qaeda offshoot, filled the void and pushed Assad out with Turkish backing. This is primarily a move by Turkey and Erdogan in Turkey. And when we talk about the risks, what's going on, we'll come back to that. But in terms of the opportunities, the greatest danger to the region right this minute is a radical Shiite element led by Iran. And so you have Iran, you have their terrorist proxies, primarily Hezbollah and Hamas, threatening the region. So they are now on their heels. When Iran caused Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th, the goal was to further weaken Israel, if not ultimately destroy Israel. It is hard to imagine, I can't think off the top of my head, of a decision by a country that has been so turned 180 degrees against themselves as October 7th. Iran is now the country on the brink of destruction. They have no missile defense. So what is the opportunity in Iran? Now is the time to attack their nuclear facility. It is completely open.
In that regard, by the way, Trump, who has just been interviewed by NBC as we speak, and Trump has just been designated Person of the Year because of his reelection, has not ruled out a war against Iran. And that's very important.
Well, you don't have to have a war with Iran. You don't have to put any boots on the ground. No one is advocating for any American boots on the ground. You don't need that. What we do need is to take out completely Iran's nuclear facility. Because let's remember, like any cornered animal, it's going to lash out. And American intelligence is now showing, because Iran is actually so at risk, they are sprinting towards a nuclear weapon and the enrichment of uranium. That's the great danger. That's the great danger. And they look at North Korea as the example. What has saved the North Korean
nuclear weapons?
The North Korean regime, nuclear weapons, exactly. That was its guarantor. They look at Ukraine, who gave up the nuclear weapons.
What happened to them?
You look at Gaddafi, who gave up his nuclear weapons. So the Iranians look at the North Korean model as their savior, and they are sprinting towards a nuclear weapon. This is the time to attack them. Now, I don't know that the Israelis have the capability of completely destroying their nuclear facilities, but they certainly have the ability to push it back years. The United States we are probably the only ones that have the ability to completely and utterly destroy the nuclear facilities for all time. Now, the Israelis have to make a decision whether they want to wait until Trump becomes president or do it while Biden's president. The risk of doing it while Biden's president is because he'll adopt the Obama model. Let's punish the Israelis and pass some crazy UN resolution. That's the last resolution that Obama passed or helped cause to be passed. Said that there's no history of Jews in East Jerusalem or the West Bank. The idea that it was called Judea and Samaria was anathema to him, or that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on top of the Jewish temple that was built thousands of years ago. I guess Obama just kind of forgot that. But so they'd be concerned about Biden punishing them in the UN, so they may want to wait. But if they do wait, then what does Donald Trump do? Hopefully, he would either join with the Israelis and a coalition of our Sunni Arab allies to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities, or at least not get in the Israelis' way, or at least give the Israelis what they need to accomplish their goal. Because that probably may well be the end of the Iranian regime, because at that point you hope that the Iranian people pop up and push.
But let's point out that, as we said in last week's show, there are really no good guys here, and Erdogan supporting
Erdogan,
and it's Turkey, and I know you have to learn how to speak a whole different language to talk about these folks. But Erdogan, I'll just call him Erdogan because it's easier for me.
Well, it insults him also.
And I'll call him and I'll call it Turkey because that's what I'm going to call it. But the short answer is Erdogan and Turkey are a major threat in their own ways. They also have hegemonic ambitions. They want to resurrect their Ottoman Empire. The Iranians want to resurrect their Persian Empire. Both want to be leaders of Islamic fundamentalist cults, one Sunni, one Shiite. So they have their own problems vis-a-vis each other. But the fact is, Erdogan has made it very, very clear he's no friend of Israel. In fact, he says he wants to rid Jerusalem of Jews. So we have to be very, very careful who we're rooting for here, because there are no good guys, as I've indicated. Erdogan is a threat. This militant force that took over and took down Assad has to be recognized as danger. It is. So it behooves the United States and Israel to be very aggressive in making sure that the weaponry, the chemical weapons, the weapons of mass destruction, the military resources, the bunker, the border that is so important to have a demilitarized zone.
The buffer zone.
Yeah,
at the
UN, you can't count on the UN to
right.
do
No,
it.
but at the end of the Yom Kippur War, the Israelis entered into an armistice with the Assad regime, with Syria, which had a demilitarized buffer zone on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. Israel has entered that buffer zone, and they have captured that buffer zone. And Israel, in my view, should annex it, and the United States should recognize it. And nobody should really be concerned in the least about the territorial integrity of Syria, because, as we discussed before, this is an artifice. This was just created by a whim by the British and the French to advance their political goals in the region. So these aren't real borders. So the Israelis should hold on to it for their national security. To the point you were making about attacking chemical weapons facilities and military outposts, the United States, to its credit, has been, along with the Israelis, destroying these sites, so it makes sure it doesn't fall into the hands of the terrorists. I mean, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani has a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States. I mean, the HTS, Hayat Tayyat al-Sharm, is an offshoot of al-Qaeda. These aren't good guys. They talk about moderating their positions, but that remains to be seen. But we can't have a situation like we had in Afghanistan, where we just catastrophically surrendered, sprinted out, and left billions of dollars of weapons for the Taliban to take over and start using against their own people. So particularly chemical weapons, right, and chlorine. Yeah, the chemical weapons that Obama left there because he wouldn't enforce his red line. Let's remember, much of this that's going on in Syria, much of the disaster that's been going on in the Middle East, thanks to Barack Obama and his religious fixation on getting a nuclear deal with the Iranians. But so you have the radical Shia element in the region led by Iran, and to your point, you now have a radical Sunni element led by Turkey, but there are a couple of fundamental differences between Turkey and Iran. Turkey is a threat that has to be managed. Iran was a threat that has to be destroyed. So Turkey is a member of NATO. It's the second largest standing army in NATO. It may have hegemonic goals in the region to rekindle its Ottoman Empire, but it is not, to our knowledge, at least to my knowledge, developing a nuclear weapon. It does not have as part of its goal, like the Iranians did, to force the Americans out of the Middle East and to destroy Israel, notwithstanding their rhetoric. So Iran Turkey is a problem that has to be monitored, and we and the Israelis have a great deal of influence over the Turks for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which there are 30 to 40 million Kurds in the Middle East that stretch from Syria through Iraq and into Iran and in southern Turkey. And Turkey views the Kurds as terrorists.
That's a joke.
Everyone's PKK. Now, a lot of people don't realize there are 900 Americans in eastern Syria, basically between the Euphrates and the Iraqi border, and they've been there since 2012. My son was one of those people. He was there. He led a mortar platoon in 2018, 2019. And we have been fighting side by side with the Kurds to defeat ISIS. And basically since 2011, the beginning of the Syrian civil war, the complete eastern part of the country has been separate and apart from Assad. I mean, this gets back to the question of territorial integrity of the Syrians. If anyone has earned nationhood, the Kurds have. And
they deserve American support.
And they deserve American support. Now, it's going to be, we have to manage the Turks, and we have to take into account their national security interests, but we have to defend the Kurds. We can't be bugging out and leaving them. But here's the question I have. There are 30 to 40 million Kurds. They've been proven to be pro-Western, pro-American, fighting with the Israelis, fighting against ISIS. I don't hear much of a groundswell for a Kurdistan or Kurdish state. But there are 2 to 3 million Palestinians for whom people will die for, protest in the streets, advocate for the destruction of the state of Israel to create a Palestinian state. I suggest that it isn't so much that the Palestinians deserve a state of their own. The reason that people want in the United States or the progressive left are interested in a Palestinian state because it will result in the destruction of the state of Israel. It's not so much what they're for. They're against the Jews and they're against Israel. Because if they really believed that people are entitled to their own states, nations are entitled to their own states, the Kurds should be getting their own state.
Well, I think that's right. Trump has said that he thinks settling the Middle East crises is easier to do than resolving the problem between Russia and Ukraine. He just recently said that in an interview with NBC. I don't know. I agree with that. I don't know if I disagree with that.
It depends what his definition of a resolution is.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I believe it's absolutely essential that Russia understands that it can't get value received for a war of aggression. I believe you have to make them pay a price. On the other hand, in a constant bloodletting, the Ukrainians don't have the resources to fight back and ultimately to beat Russia. And Trump also just said, which also I don't agree with, Trump said, well, he's not happy that the Biden administration finally allowed the Ukrainians to shoot hundreds of miles into Russian territory. I'm not happy it took the Biden administration so long to allow them to do that, because all the people who were being slaughtered, all the Russian missiles had no problems going to Ukrainian territory. Why was it fair game for them and not for the Ukrainians? This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, essayist. Our good friend, co-host, Jesse Garcia is under the weather today. Hopefully he'll be back with us next week. Please stay tuned for more interesting and important conversation on Let the Record Show.
Let the Record Show is on the air.
Build professional skills this semester with Adobe Creative Cloud and create standout work both in and out of the classroom. Save big on professional creativity tools. Students get 65% off Adobe Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat Pro, and 20 plus creative apps. No matter what project you're working on, Adobe Creative Cloud apps can help you take it to the next level. Visit adobe.com/student to learn more.
We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We are back on Let the Record Show with noted commentator, essayist, and attorney Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Our good friend and co-host Jesse Garcia is out today. Chairman Garcia is under the weather, but we'll look forward to having him with us again next week. So I want to shift gears for a minute. I want to talk about the Daniel Penny trial, and I want to talk about the premeditated murder of an insurance company executive on the streets of New York. Let me begin by saying to you, Eric, and as attorney, I think you appreciate this. There's something called prosecutorial discretion, and prosecutorial discretion is what cases should be prosecuted. After an investigation, what cases should you put into a grand jury for their review, consideration, and possible vote for a true bill, which is an indictment, or no true bill, which is no indictment. And what charges are presented by the assistant district attorney in the part about what instructions are given. Having presented cases when I was assistant attorney general to grand juries, the prosecutor in the grand jury room has enormous discretion about what evidence he or she puts in and what the instructions on the law are about what cases and what claims or crimes may be considered by the jurors, the grand jurors. In my humble opinion, this is a case that never should have been indicted. When it was indicted, it should have been prosecuted. When it was indicted, they indicted on 2 counts. One was manslaughter in the second degree, which is recklessness, and the other one was criminally negligent homicide, which is bottomed on negligence. In my view, Daniel Penny was a hero. He was not a vigilante a la Charles Bronson in Death Wish. He was a man, because of his training as a Marine and as a platoon leader like your son, rose to the occasion to protect innocent men and women, of color, by the way, and who were being terrified with threats of death and serious injury by somebody who's totally unhinged, hopped up on K2 drugs. Anyone who knows anything about the impacts of K2 drugs will tell you, Eric, that the strength of somebody hopped up on K2 drugs is enormous. So when you get involved in a physical confrontation with somebody who's hopped up on K2 drugs, it's almost like fighting somebody with the strength of 3 men. Very dangerous stuff. These people do enormous harm to other people when they're hopped up that way. Penny saw what was going on, rose to the occasion, defended these people. Alvin Bragg brought this case. He didn't even have to present it to the grand jury. He had the discretion not even to present the case to the grand jury. But he brought in the grand jury, and he had his assistant DA present on those 2 theories. I told you on the manslaughter 2 and the criminally negligent homicide. Penny gets indicted on both. After the case goes forward with a hung jury, the judge, Wiley, decides on the motion of the prosecutor to dismiss the larger count, the manslaughter, and then sends it back for consideration for the criminally negligent homicide. And within an hour of returning on the Monday morning, that case is unanimously resolved. Unanimously, when I say 12-zip for acquittal, and it's over for Daniel Penny in the criminal process. As I said to you earlier, Penny, in my mind, is a hero. The villain here is the perpetrator of this whole event, the fellow who lost his life regrettably. There were certain issues there. Did he use excessive force? I think not. He had justification to do what he had to do under the law. There was a real question of the proximate cause of the death, since the hopped up drugs and this guy had pre-existing medical conditions. So all these reasons led to the case that never should have been brought, and also tainted evidence by the medical examiner, who didn't even look at the toxicology before coming to the conclusion that this was a homicide. So it was ridiculous from beginning to end. And the assistant DA in trying the case kept describing Penny as the white guy and kept describing the victim as the black guy. So they made this a racial battle, almost in the worst kind of narrative you can make it. Total irresponsible for Bragg and his office to do this. So that's one case. Second case has to do with this kid of privilege, this Mangione kid from Maryland, graduate of an exclusive prep school in Baltimore, very wealthy family, very influential family in the charitable work and the public life of Baltimore and Maryland. Went to the University of Pennsylvania, obviously a bright kid, had both bachelor's and master's at the University of Pennsylvania, so he's an Ivy League kid. He decides to take it upon himself to make himself a hero. He's going to fight against the oppression and the cavalier disregard of the so-called insurance companies towards the people who are covered, and he takes it upon himself to shoot somebody in the back and shoots 3 times into him, ends the life of a father of 2 and a married man, and a man from all we know who was a stand-up guy, a very decent human being, a self-made man, not a little rich kid like Mangione, a well-liked, well-loved leader of the insurance company. And now they try to make this a justifiable, the left tries to make this a justifiable homicide because he has a political message, which raises the question, what is wrong with our moral compasses where you make Perry, who's a good Samaritan, the villain, and what's wrong with our moral compass, Eric, when we make a cold-blooded, premeditated killer some sort of comic book hero? Your thoughts on these two cases?
Well, as relates to the Daniel Penny case, I happen to agree with you. I think Daniel Penny was a hero, but what I think it indicates was it was a complete breakdown of society, and our government failed both Jordan Neely, the victim, or the person who died, and Daniel Penny, because what we've seen over the decades, once we have opened up our mental institutions, just putting people out on the streets, society's completely failed in terms of taking care of the mentally ill, and society's failed substantially in terms of how to deal with the homeless. And since the end of the Bloomberg administration, when you have de Blasio and then Adams, but by the takeover of the radical left, Adams isn't there, but you have New York City Council and you have a useless governor. The idea of the victim becomes, I should say, the perpetrator is the victim, and in this case, Jordan Neely gets on the subway and starts threatening to kill people. And Daniel Penny, a trained Marine, he's trained to protect the innocent. That's his training as a Marine. So he leaps into the fray to protect people. It wasn't that Jordan Neely just said stuff. He was flailing about, and there were people who were testifying that they were fearful for their person. But when society doesn't fulfill its fundamental goal, the government does not fill its primary goal of protecting its citizens. It puts the citizens in the position of having to protect themselves. And this is what you get. So this is really emblematic of the radical left's view that we don't have to protect society. Defund the police. Who gets hurt by that the most? Of course, it's minority communities. But then when you compare it now to this murder by Mangione of the healthcare executive, I'm not sure what I'm more disturbed by. Actually, I think I know what I'm more disturbed by. Mangione was just a crazy man. He had a psychotic break. He murdered someone. He's clearly mentally ill. Maybe they'll put forward a insanity defense.
Not guilty by reason of insanity.
That may be their only hope. But what I find particularly disturbing is what you were referring to is people coming around out of the woodwork, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, to justify what this guy has done. There's absolutely no justification. The idea that what Warren was essentially saying was that if you feel strongly about a political issue, I don't know, it's okay to kill someone. Well, we understand why you kill someone.
Which is nonsense. Which is a total nonsense.
Now, John Fetterman,
to his credit,
if you had told me when John Fetterman was first elected that I would love John Fetterman, I would have said you're out of your mind.
In fact, this very show, you're saying, are they kidding or they mean it when they allow Fetterman to run? They got elected. He's turned out to be the best guy in the Democratic Party in the Senate.
Clearly, he's my favorite Democrat. He made the correct observation, Elizabeth. That's nuts. Because what you're saying is if somebody doesn't like my political view, and I'm a senator, I have political views, they're justified in shooting me. I mean,
what happens if you put up too much sugar in Milky Way and somebody thinks that's an attack on the public's health? You have a right to kill the Milky Way executives?
I mean, I think we have to be able to draw some very clear lines. Under no circumstance, none, zero, no exceptions, is an individual allowed to take the law into their own hands and shoot someone.
Because you disagree with their political, ideological, or business decisions.
No, for any reason. Any reason. Yeah, I mean, and you distinguish that from Penny, who was defending the people who needed to be defended. And there was an unfortunate result. But that was because government had completely failed Neely and those other subway riders. But you can't, they're completely different things. But the irresponsibility of people who are going on to these social media sites and talking about why it was okay, that really shows a moral rot in our society. It was not okay. And anyone who says it's okay is not okay.
It's very frightening because now a whole bunch of people almost create a fan club for this kid. And there are women who say they want to date him. And what an attractive guy he is and what a good-looking kid he is. That's not the issue. The issue is he's a cold-blooded murderer. What motivated him, what his state of mind was, whether he's capable of successfully pleading a defense of not guilty by reason of insanity.
It's a tough defense.
It's a very tough defense. But, I mean, look, when he was raging at the hearing for extradition, he had all the marks of somebody who's unhinged. Now, whether that was theater or not, I don't know. But the question is, in the state of New York uses a rule called the McNaughton rule. The McNaughton rule with respect to state of mind, insanity. If you know the nature of the consequences of what you're doing, that satisfies legal sanity.
Right. You have to be able to make the argument that you did not understand what
the nature and the consequences of what you're doing
was wrong. Yeah.
Right. So it's not a medical.
Right.
So you can't get all these.
It's a competency issue.
Right. That's right. So you can't get a whole bunch of shrinks talking about the pathology of people railing against the system, and of course, this is justified. That's not what works. New York's law has been very, very clear about McNaughton rule. You know what you've done, the nature of what you've done, you know what the consequences were. And it's perfectly clear this guy did. You know why? Because he had his manifesto, which he carried around with him in his person.
Well, he was quoting Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski was his hero. The idea that the Unabomber, people that he was sending packages to people and having them explode. But that's who his role model was. So I guess according to Elizabeth Warren, Ted Kaczynski is a good guy.
Well, she's far from a moral pillar, Elizabeth Warren.
Well, she is 184th Cherokee.
That's correct. But it's interesting about this. I'm not somebody who goes out of my way to say that when people utter, in terms of free speech, evil thoughts, that's necessarily the proximate cause of evil actions. Because this is a very dangerous little conversation about the linkage between the speech and evil acts. But I will say, when you set up a climate where you're talking about clashes in culture, where you say one side is evil and the other side is good, you're setting up a predicate for people who are unhinged to act out with a justification in their own minds. And then, of course, they're rallied by these other unhinged characters. And what is it with the left, by the way, that seems to glorify all this violence? This is a culture of violence. Andy McCarthy in National Review had a great article a number of days ago, on December 11th. He's saying, what is with the left and their worship of political violence and their rationalization of everything? I'm not saying the right doesn't do stupid things, but there really seems to be a willingness to overlook. For example, when Black Lives Matter, Antifa burned down our cities and kill our cops and destroy innocent citizens and try to firebomb courthouses and take over police stations, somehow this is no big deal. This is just an otherwise peaceful protest.
Or as I was going to say, as a CNN reporter said, with huge fires and flames and explosions
and
in the background. You're watching it on TV,
camera, right.
And you have the reporter saying, these are mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah, mostly peaceful. And so it's your house.
Yeah.
And by the way, remember those two young lawyers here in New York? One of NYU Law School and one of Fordham? And they firebombed during the riots a police car. And this was all pled down. So instead of looking at 10 or 15 years in prison, they got away with a year and a half or 2 years. And I said, well, was punishment enough they got disbarred? Really? You firebomb a police car where a police officer could have been in the car, and that's okay?
It's a youthful indiscretion.
Well,
I mean, I think what we really – but I think who's worse, the far left or the far right?
Both of them are.
They both are. And
both are.
I think we have to keep in mind that politics is not a straight line. It's that horseshoe, and the extreme left and the extreme right kind of meet at the bottom of that horseshoe.
It's the centrists, the so-called bourgeois values that keep society in place.
Yeah, we really need to temper our discourse. We need to be able to better appreciate other people's arguments. We need to be able to listen to them. You don't have to agree with them, and you can fight back against them aggressively. Fight back against them with other speech. The way to beat bad speech is with more speech, not less speech, and not violence. And we seem to have gotten away from that, and we need to start getting back to it. That needs to start being the norm. So when you start vilifying people, you start calling them deplorables, and every time someone disagrees with you, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe, you're a homophobe, you're an Islamophobe. You have to stop with the names. You want to be able to articulate an argument and say on the merits why you disagree, fine. But let's start getting away from the labels, because it's an intellectual laziness, because it requires you to formulate an argument and give it thought. And if people didn't speak until they thought this through, you'd have a lot of quiet people out there.
And, by the way, it also shows a lack of moral standards, because you're dehumanizing your opponents. You may not be able to agree with them, but at least respect the other side and see what you can do to have a civilized, respectful discussion. Because civilization, society, rests on a very precarious base. And if you have any doubts, you go look back in history when the centrifolds, the so-called bourgeois institutions, which the left so cavalierly want to destroy and constantly attack, when those fail and the left and the right extremists go after each other, you have total chaos. You have either civil war or ultimately you have totalitarianism of the victor, whether it's the communists who win or the Nazis who win, but all the quality of life values of respect and dignity die with this death of civilization.
And that's one of the huge dangers of the social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, because it doesn't countenance, it does not allow for opposition. There's an absolute right, correctness, correct thought, and that if you disagree with that thought, the people that believe those are entitled or allowed to rise up by any means necessary to silence the people who dissent.
It's an awful situation.
It's terrible.
This is Let the Record Show with noted attorney, columnist, essayist, commentator, my good friend Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We'll be back in a few moments for the final segment of this week's Let the Record Show.
This is Let the Record Show.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We are back on Let the Record Show with Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Our very good friend, the co-host of Let the Record Show, Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the State Republican Party and the county chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party, is out today under the weather. We look forward to his quick and speedy, complete recovery and look forward to having him back with us next week. So, Eric, a guy named Donald Trump, as I said earlier, has just become Person of the Year.
By Time Magazine.
Time Magazine, not necessarily a big fan of his.
Who even knew Time Magazine still existed?
I did, actually.
Who subscribes?
I don't know. Who reads it? I don't know, but he's Man of the Year, except you can't call him Man of the Year anymore. It's Person of the Year. Okay. But Trump is certainly back on the world stage. And the question is, what impacts has he had so far? And what can we expect in his second administration on the world stage? World stage. What does that mean, world stage, Eric? It means, will the U.S. world order, the American-led Pax Americana, will be reinvigorated. We understand the responsibilities for international action because this is not a safe or sane world, and we can't be protected by vast oceans anymore, not with the developments in technology and military developments. So you just can't sit idly back and say it's somebody else's problem. We're not going to get involved. And if we step back, who's going to take the lead? The intellectually and moral weaklings in Europe, the apologists who care nothing about the right thing to do, the ones who will do business with the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese when it's in their interest. You can't rely on them. Somebody has to take the lead. Somebody has to be responsible. If you don't have world order, you don't have anything but world chaos. And the answer, of course, all due respect to Woodrow Wilson and his League of Nations, or Roosevelt and Truman with the United Nations, those great globalist institutions have failed. One of the reasons they failed is because you have too many members who don't adhere to basic values of civilization, of democracy, of due process, of fair and righteous thinking. Those are dangerous organizations because they wrap themselves in the platitude of righteousness and political correctness, but they don't lead. When's the last time you saw, Eric, the UN stopping a war When's the last time?
I've seen them help start wars.
Ah, well said. The UN is virtually a worthless organization. The UNRWA people, hundreds and hundreds, I think it was 400 of them of Hamas terrorists were on their payroll. They've done nothing but be anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. The world courts, International Criminal Court and the Court of World Justice, have done nothing but weaponize against the Israelis in favor of anti-Semitism. And very troubling to me are countries like South Africa and Ireland who rally behind this ridiculousness of having arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Bennett, the defense minister of Israel, because they're fighting to protect themselves against an existential threat, this ring of fire created by Iran. And nobody's condemning Iran. Where's the arrest warrants for Ayatollah and the Revolutionary Guard?
Where's the arrest warrant for Assad, who's now in Moscow?
By the way, where's the arrest warrant for Putin, who invaded and killed hundreds of thousands of people, his own and the Ukrainians, and has destabilized Europe?
Well, you talk about Trump back on the world stage. I don't think there's anything more emblematic of that than the reopening of the Cathedral at Notre Dame. It's an important part of Western civilization. It's part of the French identity. Joe Biden is still technically the president, but who did Macron invite? He invited Donald Trump. So the image is Donald Trump and Macron at Notre Dame, and Joe Biden. I guess it was too cold to sit on the beach, but he's home on vacation. You know, Trump is back, and what does that mean on the world stage? Look, the American-led world order was slowly being eroded by the Biden administration. This concept of de-escalation, appeasement, and trying to manage wars or trying to manage crises rather than winning them. And there was no better example of that, as we discussed earlier in the show, than what goes on in the Middle East and Israel. Biden tried to stop the Israelis from winning. He didn't want them to lose, but he wanted to stop them from winning.
Same thing in Ukraine?
And exactly. I was just going to make that point. It's the same thing in Ukraine. Let's remember when Putin was rallying his troops around Ukraine, he was getting a lot of suggestions, Biden was, from Europe and many in the United States. Now is the time to sanction Putin. He wouldn't sanction him. And then he said, Biden did, a minor incursion would be okay. Putin took that as a green light. And of course, all of this goes back to the catastrophic surrender in Afghanistan, which gave Putin the theory, the understanding or belief that he could invade Ukraine, and understandably so. So now he invades. And what was Biden's first response? It wasn't to defend Ukraine. It wasn't to flood Ukraine with weapons so it can defend himself. He offered Zelensky a ride. He wanted Zelensky to surrender. Had it been left to Joe Biden, the Ukraine war would have ended long ago. Russia would own all of Ukraine. Then the only question would be, would Russia now be in the Baltics or in Poland or in Romania? How far would Putin go? So that's what happens when you appease. Appeasement failed in the last century, as we know from with Hitler, and it's failing in this century. Fortunately, the Israelis ignored Biden as Biden encouraged them to basically surrender. Don't go into Gaza. Don't attack Hezbollah. Don't attack Iran. If a bomb's going to fall on your head, it's okay to shoot it out of the sky. But all of this, so in Israel was successful because Israel was strong enough and be able to ignore him and enough support in Congress to be able to do it. Ukraine did not have that capability and did not have that support in Ukraine. I happen to have been from the school that we should have been giving Ukraine as many weapons as it needed, as quickly as they needed, so that they could win and defeat Russia, push them completely out of Ukraine, push them out of Crimea. But that ship has sailed. Whether or not I believe that was a good policy is now irrelevant, because just as a practical matter, no matter what your view is, Ukraine is just too weak to be able to do that. So there's going to be, now getting back to Trump, there's going to be a negotiated settlement. People talk about, Trump was softer on Ukraine and Biden was more supportive. I would make the case that their policies were identical. Their rhetoric may have been different, but the policy was identical. It was to put Ukraine in a position at some point to negotiate the end of the war. There's going to be a portion of Ukraine, territorial concessions to Putin. And then the question becomes, what guarantees will Putin give that he won't advance further on Ukraine or look to move further west in Europe? And what I suspect may happen, Donald Trump wants to win the negotiation, and Putin wants to win the negotiation. And from Donald Trump's perspective, winning the negotiation may be a deal that Putin can't accept, and vice versa. I don't know that there's going to be such a simple solution to the Ukraine problem, because Putin's going to hold out a hard line, and Trump is going to hold out a hard line. And Trump doesn't like to be embarrassed. And let's assume that negotiation goes badly and there is no peace agreement, there is no solution right now. What does Trump do at that point? What does Trump do at that point? I'm not 100% clear. That'll be very interesting to watch. And in terms of China, to Trump's credit, a lot of the policies, successful policies that he had vis-a-vis China, Biden kept in place. That was one of the few places that Biden didn't reverse everything Trump had done. Tariffs on China remained in place. A different perspective on how to view China, which Trump helped bring about, remains very popular on both sides of the aisle. It'll be interesting to see how Trump deals with Xi in his second term. And then, of course, there's North Korea. How he's going to deal with Kim Jong-un. That also remains to be seen. Look, there's a nexus between the war in Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. And that nexus is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are trying to end the American-led world order and substitute a world order led by them, a world order of tyrannies. And it is Donald Trump's job as the leader of the free world and Western civilization and the United States to make sure that the United States remains the preeminent power in the world. And I think one of the things he did that actually was tremendous, that I applaud, is he was talking to some of these countries that wanted to substitute other currencies for the dollar as the default currency.
The BRIC.
BRICS. So it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they were talking about using a different currency. And Trump said, okay, go right ahead. I will impose 100% tariffs on all your goods. The dollar will remain the default currency in the world.
And people have to understand how important that is. That's one of the great strengths the United States has.
100%. So Trump has got that one 100% right. And if that is an indication of the direction he's going to lead, I'm feeling pretty good. And then you look at some of his appointments.
I want to raise that with you because some of those appointments I find very compelling and I'm very happy with, and some I find very troubling. Particularly two people I'm very, very happy. Well, two or three I'm very, very happy with. I'm happy with Mike Waltz as head of national security.
He's spectacular.
I'm happy with Senator Rubio.
Grand slam.
For Secretary of State. I'm happy with Governor Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel.
And Elise Stefanik to the UN. Terrific.
Right. I'm very troubled by Tulsi Gabbard as the head of this. What is it? What's the name?
Head of National Intelligence.
National Intelligence. I want to be fair to the lady. I've seen her speak, and I've been at dinners with her. In large measures, I don't know what her real views are. She said some stuff that it's almost like a cult of neo-isolationism and almost pro-Assad and pro-Russian. But I don't know, what's the real speak? What does she really think? And does she have the expertise to do the job well?
Well, remember, in 2016, she left her job at she was a congresswoman from Hawaii, and she left her job at the Democratic National Committee to become co-chair of the Bernie Sanders for President Committee. So she is a Bernie Sanders acolyte. This gets back to that horseshoe in politics we were talking about. And then there are interviews where she is saying that Bashar al-Assad is not an enemy of the United States. He's a misunderstood moderate. That's just
most moderates chemically destroy their own people.
Yeah, it's an incomprehensible statement. You can't reconcile that with sanity. And then she's a Putin apologist. She's in many ways a creation of Tucker Carlson. She would go on that show all the time, and just say the words, I hate forever wars, I hate forever wars, whatever those happen to be.
By the way, nobody likes war.
No.
Not our people anyway, not the United States. Nobody wants war, but there are certain wars, as we both know, that have to be fought.
And when you fight a war, you fight them to win. And there's been a lot, and there's a lot to criticize with how the United States has been prosecuting its wars since the end of World War II. And that's a legitimate debate. But it is not a legitimate debate to say that Assad is a misunderstood moderate, that Putin is a misunderstood moderate. She is an isolationist. She is a populist. She's a Bernie Sanders acolyte. People evolve in their views, but I've not heard any evolution of her views. I mean, I don't listen to her all that regularly, but I'd be curious to hear what her view is on all of this now. What her view of Assad is, particularly today. And as my understanding, she's having some trouble in her conversations with the senators, about justifying her position and demonstrating a facility with the issues and how to solve them.
Well, I think the senators, frankly, would be doing President Trump an enormous favor by voting her down. Because I think that I see nothing but trouble if she's in that position. And I don't know, frankly, how that's going to be working in terms of the operational logistics, who really is influential in terms of decision-making and the information that's fed, the pipe stream of information to the President of the United States. I do know that Mike Waltz, Congressman Waltz, who's on the Armed Services and Intelligence Committee and Homeland Security, and who you and I both know well, is first rate.
Yep.
I also know that Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, is also first rate.
Think about it for a second, though. This is the son of a Cuban immigrant. Only in America can a son of an immigrant become the most powerful foreign policy voice in the country, the spokesperson for the most powerful country in the world.
And he understands what tyranny is.
Exactly.
But what I am saying is you put these people in a room, and it's got to be Waltz and Rubio on one side who understand the need for U.S. leadership and the threats that come by aggressive, adventurous nations, and the danger of, on our side, of being appeasers or isolationists. Then you have this woman who's very troubling indeed. So if the senators vote her down, get her out of the room, and get somebody with some real gravitas in there, they'd be much better off. Because ultimately, I think this is a marriage amongst the senior staff of President Trump that cannot work.
Well, look, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having divergent views in a discussion. You don't want to have groupthink. So you want to get different views, but you want them to be based in reality. And you want them to be based in fact. You want someone to be knowledgeable. You want to be able to say, yes, I understand your point, but I would interpret the fact differently, and this is what I believe. And I don't know if that's the case with Tulsi Gabbard. Look, Trump nominated her. She's entitled to great deference. When the president nominates someone, they're entitled to great deference, and there has to be a compelling reason to not confirm them. And she's entitled to be heard. She's entitled to go through the process. And she, maybe she will be confirmed. Maybe she'll be able to satisfy the senators. Maybe her views on some of these things have evolved. Maybe some of these positions that she's taken or things that she has been quoted as saying have been taken out of context. She's entitled to explain them. So we'll see how that goes. But I don't know it's going to be as smooth sailing as it was going to be for someone like Marco Rubio.
Well, Marco Rubio is entitled to smooth sailing. I think the senators who know him should all unanimously
I haven't heard a single person speak out negatively.
Because Marco Rubio is truly wonderful. And Mike Waltz also similarly is truly wonderful.
But he's an appointment. He doesn't have to be confirmed.
No, but I'm saying, these are wonderful appointments.
He is.
And Governor Huckabee, the ambassador.
Terrific. Yep.
Absolutely terrific. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Pam Bondi.
Yeah.
She's going to be the Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah, I think that's a great selection.
I know her from her days as Attorney General of Florida.
The funny thing is that the left's criticism of her is she's qualified.
They'll never forgive her for being on the defense team for Trump's
right. So she's qualified.
Impeachment
she might be able to accomplish things. That's their concern.
And hopefully she will. Hopefully she'll bring back the true administration of justice, the stopping of the weaponization by the Justice Department and the FBI and other agencies, including the IRS, of just carrying out political hits. And Trump has said he's not going to tell them to do this. They'll make all their decisions independently. That is, the investigations by the FBI and the prosecutions by the Justice Department based on the merits. He's not giving them a free pass, but he is telling them, do your job, but he's not going to go forward and use them for retribution. His view about the best retribution, he said, is success. The victory of the United States in restoring its economic strength, its energy strength, its preparedness to protect our people against threats, both foreign and domestic. I take the president at his word, and I hope we're both delighted in the new year when the new administration takes over on January 20th. But it's a long time between now and January 20th, and the Biden-Harris administration could still do a lot of bad stuff, as they have over the last 4 years. This has been Left the Record Show with Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and we look forward to having our good friend, co-host, Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the State Republican Party, county chair of Suffolk Party, back with us next week on Left the Record Show. Thank you for listening. God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America. Thanks again.
This is Let the Record Show.